Hey, Turner. Right. Well, kia ora koutou, and welcome to everybody. It's just great to have you here and get a decent crowd along to learn about a very interesting subject. And I'm going to do a bit of a plug for the book in a minute. But before that, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this morning and introduce Catherine Knight, who's obviously standing up over there, the author of what I believe is an important book, An Uncommon Land. I'll try and explain why briefly, and she'll explain in a lot more detail. And the important book is called An Uncommon Land, The History of the Commons. Now, there's quite a lot loaded in that title, and she'll tell you a lot more about it in a minute. I use the word important deliberately as it focuses on the enclosure and near on the enclosures all over Britain, and the invisibility of commons across the whole of the New Zealand social and geographical landscape, especially the colonial part of it. Catherine explores how the ethos of the commons could be applied to the way we reviewed land and resources today, which I guess is why some of you are here to learn about those sorts of things, and help shape a more just, equitable, and regenerative economy. So it is hugely relevant as we find some more. Cheers. Right. As a well-known historian of the New Zealand wars, Vincent O'Malley states, a highly original, intriguing, and excellent piece of scholarship. An Uncommon Land looks to the past to provide a pathway to a sustainable and fairer future. Sounds like something worth thinking about and achieving. Catherine has written extensively over the last dozen years or so. She has published 6 acclaimed books, especially on the environmental history of rivers, 50 years of environmental politics in New Zealand, and an environmental history of Manawatu. Now, this latest and 6th book, An Uncommon Land, focuses on her own family. And this is one thing I think that makes the book so interesting. It's just got this familial dimension in it, which has been inspirational to people writing another book about farming as well. Okay. And it's about a family that comes mainly from Denmark, England, and Ireland to take up farming in the Waikato. Several big themes are treated in this examination, including the loss of clean water, which I know is why some of you are here to learn more about that, and the damage caused to the entire society, that is everybody, by Maori land loss, which is something she talks about in a very intelligent way. There are also suggestions as to how current New Zealand, the place we're living in right now in 2025, might go about solving many of the problems that confront farming today. So on that note, we're looking forward to hearing what she has to share with us today. And I'm just delighted that you could get here to talk to us about this very interesting and important book. I'll leave another one lying around if you want to have a look at it. And it's got great photographs, apart from anything else, and looks wonderful. Smell, not on top of which is very well written, but I'll stop there. Okay, I agree.
I'll keep Tom on as my chief marketer, promoter, doing a very good job. So kia ora koutou. So nice to be here. I drove down this morning, set out in the dark, getting the ice, melting the ice off my windscreen from Timaru, and I poured water on it, packed the rest of my stuff, and by the time I got back to the car, it had all started freaking, and I was like, I'm not used to that, having lived in the North Island for quite a long time, but it brought back nice memories of black ice. I once broke my wrist in about 1,000 places, this one here, and they put a pin in it because I slipped on black ice in Christchurch, where I worked and lived, because I didn't know it existed, being brought up in the Manawatu. There's no black ice. So anyway, so, random anecdote. Sorry about that. So yeah, kia ora koutou. So wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, Janet. Thank you, Sonia, for your fantastic organisation. Where is she? I've lost her. And thank you so much, Tom, for the introduction. And I would also like to say, Tom mentioned my second book, which was New Zealand's Rivers. My very first book was an environmental history of the Manawatu. It was called Ravaged Beauty. I often say it is a joke that it's not an autobiography. Good job for laughing. I said that the other day and there was this pause. And they're like, oh yeah, I get it. But after I did that, I actually had a conversation with Tom. I don't know whether you remember this, Tom. And I said, I don't know I'd really like to write another book, but I don't know what to write about. And Tom said, we need an environmental history of rivers. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I thought, okay, righto. Don't really know much about rivers, but I will soon will. And that one, and that's completely sold out, and there's been a huge, I still have people coming up to me with copies that they've found somewhere to sign. So it's obviously, I guess, has been valued by parts of the community. Anyway, I'm going to crack on. I just want to preface the little segment I'm going to do next by saying I suspect everyone in this room knows as I talk about what I'm going to talk about, which is the planetary predicament. You know all this stuff. I'm preaching to the converted, but I think it is worth noting, worth reminding ourselves, even if we know it, that we have to keep on telling others about this. And I hope that, by honing the messages around that, we can, and I know the Centre for Sustainability will be doing this all the time, but I think we need to do more and more of this. And I think hopefully you'll see why in the next few slides, what I'm talking about there. So bear with me. And also, if you're a few slides in and go, oh God, this is depressing, I will get a bit more upbeat. I promise you. So would it be good to have the lights off so that the pictures are, do you reckon? It might just be, thank you. Yeah, that's awesome. And then I'm hopefully a bit darker on the camera as well. So, oops, that didn't work. Am I pointing it the wrong way, or I could perfect. Okay, so as I said, I'd like to start just by reminding ourselves, as if we needed reminding, of the planetary predicament and the fact that it is a polycrisis. So I'm sure everyone in this room will be familiar with this picture or a variation of it, which is Rockstrom and his team's research on the planetary boundaries, which so starkly illustrates this. And as we know, Rockstrom and his team of scientists at the Stockholm Resilience Centre identified nine processes that are critical for maintaining the stability and resilience of the Earth's system as a whole. And of these, with their regular updates, they have found 6 of the 9 boundaries are transgressed, with ocean acidification very close to being breached. So in other words, in simple terms, we are facing multiple trajectories that on their own present serious risks to humanity and the ecological system we rely on to live. But together, the magnitude of risk is catastrophic and cannot be solved without fundamental changes in the way we live and organise ourselves as human society. Again, I don't need to be telling you this, but just as a reminder to ourselves, what are these trajectories? And this is not going to be an exhaustive list. This is this talk I'm doing to quite a general audience. You're probably the most informed that I've talked to so far, so I'm very aware of that. So what are these trajectories? Firstly, of course, climate change. we are facing the prospect of at least 2.7 degrees warming above pre-industrial levels by the end of the century. We know that large areas of the Earth's land area will be rendered uninhabitable, exit the humid climate niche, as they call it, which is shown in purple on this graphic, leading to this death and displacement of millions, if not billions, of people. A report earlier this year from the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, and I suspect everyone's familiar with these people, what they do, but they are the experts that assess the scale of future financial risk for the insurance and investment sectors. So they are people that are worth listening to. And their report earlier this year indicates that climate heating of 2 degrees or more by 2050 will likely lead to more than 2 billion human deaths, which is more than a quarter of the global population, with 3 degrees warming likely leading to more than 4 billion people perishing, half of the world's population. Of course, this is mainly around the equatorial belt, a lot of it in the global south, as opposed to the first world nations, which is, you know, part of the whole inequity of climate impacts and the effects of overshoot. So another trajectory that we're facing and very familiar with, ecological collapse. And just to focus on one aspect of ecological collapse, pollinator species. Studies suggest that populations of flying insects have declined by 75% in the last 25 years. And this cartoon on the right, I actually saw this in Mike Joy did a presentation recently at Massey, and I saw this cartoon and that's what I talk about in my presentation. So I went and found it. It's really so this is showing the windscreen effect. So those of us who are over 40 will have observed this for ourselves, thinking back to car trips in the 60s, 70s, and even the 80s, and you will remember the car windscreen becoming blackened with squished insects. And now you're lucky to get one on a road trip. So aside, of course, from the ecological implications, this has serious implications for the production of food. Without pollinator species, we simply cannot grow food. Environmental pollution. For example, microplastics are now everywhere, as we know, in our soil, in our waters and our oceans, in our food and in our bodies. You guys will definitely be familiar with this, the University of Otago study a few years ago, which found microplastics in 75% of commercially caught fish in New Zealand's southern waters. I just thought it was astounding, 75%. And as we know, microplastics, which is just one environmental pollutant, are linked to decreased reproductive health and increased incidence of cancer, cardiovascular disease, as well as a range of other illnesses. And the final trajectory I'm going to talk about, which is not biophysical, but obviously very much related, is human fertility. So this is an astounding statistic that I actually only became aware of a few months ago, that over the past 50 years, human sperm counts have fallen by more than 50% around the globe, which I found simply astonishing. This is linked, of course, with environmental pollution, including but not limited to microplastics. And here I've only really outlined a representative sample of the drivers and symptoms of the biophysical crisis. We also have major issues in public health, and especially in terms of lifestyle diseases such as obesity, heart disease, diabetes, and mental health, including depression. On the social side, we have increasing housing deprivation, increased child poverty, increasing income inequity, social dislocation, and an epidemic of loneliness. all of these social issues creating a tinderbox that could ignite at any time, especially as pressure builds on communities with the increasing frequency of damaging weather. In the recent Tasman floods, and this is actually a photo, this is Cyclone Gabriel, but I just thought it was a pretty impactful photo. It was notable, I thought, how often concerns were raised about deteriorating mental well-being in the media coverage as a result of the floods. And scientists advise that we can expect these so-called 1 in 100 year floods somewhere in New Zealand every single year. And when you think about that, that is basically a community or a district or a region somewhere in New Zealand facing, this huge, their livelihoods being destroyed, silt-covered orchards, houses being washed away, huge mental health pressures, basically continuously from now on, which is an astonishing thought. So the main purpose of reminding ourselves that we face crises on multiple fronts is that it should point us to the fact that we cannot solve the challenges we face with technology or more growth. Whether we call that growth green or sustainable or otherwise, because, of course, growth, unsustainable growth or growth, GDP growth and overshoot is the cause of all of these issues. Overshoot is the root cause of all of these issues in the first place. So yes, renewable energy will be part of the transition to a less carbon-intensive economy. But as we know, carbon emissions are not the only thing we need to reduce. And so this is, all about, I was thinking whimsically about wistfully, I should say, about carbon tunnel vision. This is that sort of warning around carbon tunnel vision. And I was reflecting on the last sort of year or two with the current political climate, and I was thinking back and thinking wistfully, oh, it'd be nice if we at least had carbon tunnel vision. We don't even have that in our political environment at the moment. But the point remains. We need to fundamentally shift the way we live and the way we organise our economy to reduce the harm we are perpetrating on Earth's critical life-supporting functions, as well as to human society itself. So, coming finally to commons, what is the role that commons play in this? First of all, good to just sort of create a shared understanding of what we mean by commons, both in the traditional sense and perhaps more in the contemporary context. So historically, commons referred to the land and associated resources that people have shared access to, independent of any ownership rights. Commons have existed in some shape or form since humans roamed the earth. And in fact, it is important to remember that land and other resources have been held in common for much longer than they have been considered private property being an only relatively recent form of managing resources and land that has come through in the last few hundred years. In England and Wales, the unlanded people's rights to access resources such as woods, meadows and fields and their natural resources were first legally protected under the Magna Carta in 1215 and subsequently the Charter of the Forest of 1217, 2 years later. So the Charter of the Forest is fascinating, and I'll just share with you a little bit about what it did and how important it was to the majority of the population. So the Charter of the Forest enshrined peasant farmers' rights to a whole range of common resources. For example, pasture for pigs, which was known as pannage, and other grazing for other animals, collection of wood, which had its own name, estuva, and cutting of turf for fuel, known as turbary, among a host of other rights to collect wild foods and other resources, such as thatching for roofs, for example. The Charter also limited the extent of royal forests and reformed the administration of forest law, curbing the monarch's power over these resources. And I just thought I'd pause to say it's fascinating that the word forest, many of you may know this, but is Latin related to the idea of being outside. So the term originally did not mean a wooded place. It was a piece of land that commons rights did not apply to. And the kings over the centuries amassed more and more of these royal forests where they alone could go in and hunt deer and so on. And there was a huge price to pay if a commoner went in and poached a deer or something, including, death and blinding and all sorts of awful punishments. So this very important Charter of the Forest law pulled back on those powers. In medieval England, it is estimated that commons made up about half of all the land area in medieval times. Today, the notion of commons has been expanded to other goods and services that are freely available and deliver on the public good. For instance, in his book on commons, Guy Standing, who's written extensively on commons in the contemporary context, he discusses social commons, civil commons, cultural, and knowledge commons. So, going back in time again to enclosure, but almost as soon as common rights were set in law in the 13th century, they were being eroded through enclosure, which literally means using fences, hedges, or ditches, and later the law, to demarcate land to exclude those with customary rights. The rise of pastoral farming, in this case sheep farming, from around the 15th century, led to an acceleration in the pace of enclosure. Stock farming is incompatible with the open field system for obvious reasons. Unfenced stock will wander in and eat the neighbouring farmers' wheat or barley or whatever they happen to be growing. Agricultural advances from the mid-17th century provided a further impetus. Landlords realised they could make more money by consolidating land and using new techniques such as ploughing technology to cultivate their land, which required a bigger paddock size. The final stage was parliamentary enclosure. Between 1760 and 1870, about 4,000 acts of Parliament enclosed 7 million hectares of land, about 1/6 of England's total land area. These processes were ruthlessly effective in extinguishing commons from the landscape. From 50% of land in medieval times, today only about 3% of land in England is commons. And enclosure had that added benefit in quote marks, of forcing many former tenant farmers and their families to sell their land in industrialising cities, effectively enclosing people. Whether deliberately or not, by dispossessing people from the land, destroying subsistence economies, the elite classes, the capitalists and the bureaucracy, effectively created a captive market of consumers. And we see a continuation of that process through to contemporary society, where people have been sucked into a pattern of mass consumption and throwaway culture. And in parallel with domestic enclosure, the British Empire and other European imperial powers were expanding into and appropriating the lands of other people. Through the slave trade, these nations were also commodifying human beings as cheap labour for agriculture and industry. The huge bounty of natural resources and human beings taken from the global south became the foundation of an expansionist economy in the global north, the capitalist economy, the one we have today, leading George Monbiot to describe capitalism as an economic system founded on colonial looting. And as we will see, colonialism was justified using the same reasoning as enclosure was. As commons were erased, the doctrine of private property was gaining ascendancy. English philosopher John Locke was instrumental in justifying enclosure as well as colonization because, he argued, it made land more productive, thereby benefiting humankind as a whole. An argument remarkably similar to that today used to rationalize economic growth. And while it is tempting to demonize Locke as being instrumental in justifying enclosure, colonization and unconstrained capitalism, his arguments must be understood within the context of the age. He was writing at a time of unfettered monarchical powers, with few protections for the rights of the common man. He argued for limitations to the power of the state, for religious tolerance, the separation of church and state, and the protection of people's rights to life, liberty, and property, all of which were revolutionary ideas at the time. These ideas, of course, became foundational to modern democracies. In colonial New Zealand too, the doctrine of improvement was applied to all facets of land management. For instance, under the Land Act 1877, settlers were able to purchase land under deferred payment schemes, paying the outstanding amount over a period of time, so long as they made improvements. In other words, cleared the land of forest and sowed pasture. These and other policies proved effective, and within a few decades, all that remained of vast swathes of lowland forest that once covered this archipelago, from mountains to the sea, were charred stumps and ash. Wetlands, too, were barriers to progress and had to be eliminated. In 19th century England, swamps were not only wastelands, in other words, unproductive expanses of boggy land, they were also thought to be the source of disease-causing noxious fumes or miasma. New Zealand's colonists brought with them a long legacy of swamp drainage. The botanist for Cook's expedition, Joseph Banks, already wealthy through inheritance, was able to greatly expand his wealth by draining the fens of eastern England and turning them to highly lucrative pastoral farming. Today, as we know, only 10% of the original wetlands in New Zealand have survived the onslaught of drainage of the early 20th century, and many of what do remain do so only in a severely degraded state. And this actually is an image of Whangamarino, which is near my ancestors that Tom talked about, settled just the west, basically land wedged between the mighty Waikato River to the west and the Whangamarino wetland in the east. And this is the second largest peatland in the North Island. I believe Southland has the biggest peatland in New Zealand. So the South Island claims that honour. But incredibly, the fact that it has survived against the odds, and I kind of explain why in the book, it's an incredible natural asset that we should be treasuring much more than we do. So how do my ancestors' stories fit into the story of enclosure, progress, and improvement? The desire to own land and be in control of their own destinies was what motivated many people to migrate to the other side of the world, with all the uncertainty and risk and heartbreak associated with that. and my ancestors were no exception. This aspiration could only be met because of the British colonial project, based on the global enclosure of other people's lands and, more broadly, imperialism. Based on the ideology of progress and improvement popularised by John Locke, land still being held by Māori, including the Waikato tribes in the second half of the 19th century, was considered unproductive. Outright confiscation was still hard to justify, though, so the spurious threat of aggression was used to orchestrate a war and confiscate land as a punishment. It is unclear how much my ancestors knew about this history, and even if they did, it would have likely been accepted as the way of the world at the time. In the book, I liken their culpability with ours. I note there are striking parallels with the circumstances in which we find ourselves today, in that we have become unwitting but quite willing participants in a socio-economic system that perpetrates untold harm on the planet while continuing to entrench and exacerbate inequity and injustice. But in their lives, I also found countless examples of the sort of wisdom and values that we would do well to draw on as we move into a future where community and self-reliance is going to become more important than ever. For instance, reciprocity and cooperation. Neighbours and communities work together to build community halls, schools, and help each other at harvest times and so on. They actually had no other choice but to do this. There was a strong spirit of public good and shared well-being, exemplified by my great-grandfather Lars Hansen, this handsome chap here, who donated a piece of his farm to build a school for the community. Conviviality and social connection. Entertainment was based entirely on social connection, whether it be barn dances, playing music, cards, conversation over meals, country fairs, and even the daily trip to the creamery, shown here, was an opportunity for social connection, information sharing, and so on. In fact, there's literature, it might have even been Brian Easton book, one of his earlier books actually, where he talked about how important this daily trip was. It was kind of like the Facebook community page of its day, except you actually were there physically. But so they chatted to each other and said, did you hear about Jack down the road? And did you hear about this newfangled, cream separator or whatever they talked about, which is really interesting. And of course, they had to wait for their milk to be separated. So what better to, have a yarn with your neighbours. So, with these days of everything being automated and computer generated, we've kind of lost this. And circularity. Resources were recycled and reused as a matter of course. For example, when the Whangamarino School went out of commission, the building was split into pieces and parts repurposed as extensions of other buildings. And this was not unusual, the wholesale repurposing of entire buildings. Self-sufficiency and local economy, people grew their own food and other staples, such as flour and oats, were sourced locally. So, how can we apply the commons ethos to contemporary society? In the book, I discuss, this is towards the end of the book, the final couple of chapters, I discuss 5 spheres in which interventions could strengthen public good outcomes, all centred on land, as signalled by the title of the book. These also involve treating land as a shared inheritance, as commons, rather than as a commodity for private wealth creation. So the first of these spheres that I discuss is housing. in changing our attitude to housing from a profit maximizing economic activity, aka real estate, to a human right-based approach, a right to a warm, dry, and healthy home, irrespective of one's income. Food system, moving away from a highly industrialized, profit maximizing and import reliant food system to one that is diverse, resilient, builds on bioregional strengths, increases community agency, and meets human needs first. Land use, moving away from a profit maximizing, exploitative, i.e. future limiting use of land, towards making better choices about land use with the full suite of positive and negative impacts in mind, or as economists like to call them, externalities, including returning land to nature in some cases. And there's a couple of examples here in Britain, both in England and in Ireland, which is part of the EU. There are much stronger government-funded incentives to do this sort of thing, to re-wet wetlands on private land and to re-wild. And they also have this, quite a big thing is land sharing, which didn't intuitively make sense to me at first. But this is where you keep on farming a landscape, but dedicate space or share the space with biodiversity by planting hedgerows or wetlands or stream riparian planting and such like. And they refer to this as land sharing, which I think is quite a nice concept. Henry Dimbleby, who led the land national food strategy for the UK, for the British government, talks about a lot of the stuff in his book. It's a great book. Ravenous, I think it's called. It's a really brilliant, for anyone who's interested in food system and land use, which I know a lot of you are, if you haven't read that already. And access to nature. Making high quality nature spaces accessible to all New Zealanders, irrespective of wealth. This means making our urban spaces, where 86% of us live, more green and blue space rich. Increasing tree canopy, artificial wetlands, and making more space for waterways will also have significant benefits for resilience in the face of climate change, in the form of temperature and water regulation, as well as providing habitat for biodiversity. And the final sphere I talk about is urban livability. Our cities and towns have been built around cars rather than people. By clustering high amenity, mixed use communities around public transport nodes with ample public realm spaces, we could reduce the carbon, material, and energy intensity of our lives and improve health and well-being through active transport and improved social connection. So at this stage, I'm just going to very quickly play the trailer and give you a break from my voice. Oh my gosh. Okay, no, that was the slide. Okay, escape maybe. So just need to find video. I just need to minimize that. Is it escape again? Yeah. There we go. This is where was it? There, brilliant. This is where it's very helpful to have a. Okay, press play, maybe. Oops. Was a bit of a promo there. So just finally, Tom mentioned that I might talk about the meaning of an uncommon land, and so I am. This is my final slide. So the title of my book, An Uncommon Land, refers, as you may have guessed, to the almost total absence of commons in the colonial and contemporary New Zealand social landscape. Commons were not part of a colonial mindset that put private property and private wealth creation at the centre of the social and economic system. But it also has dual meaning and also signals potential. I believe if any country can reinvent itself to put well-being and sufficiency at the centre of the economic system, Aotearoa New Zealand can, becoming an uncommon land in a more positive, exemplary sense. So I will leave you with that thought and finish there.